What if I told you that the majestic stone castles we are used to seeing in movies were actually giant refrigerators? Stone is a material that not only does not retain heat, it literally sucks it out of the air, seeking to equalize the temperature inside with the icy street outside. The architects of that time understood this problem perfectly and created hidden engineering systems that almost no one remembers today. They couldn't install central heating, but they learned to control air and energy flows so masterfully that we couldn't even dream of it. These solutions were built into the very structure of the buildings, hidden in the thickness of the walls and under the floors, working invisibly to the eye. Watch the video to the end to find out what deadly danger threatened those who tried to warm up too quickly and why the richest king slept almost sitting up. What if I told you that everything you believed about cold dungeons is not true? We are used to thinking of castle basements as damp and icy dungeons, where it is impossible to stay without shivering. However, medieval engineers knew the physics of the earth much better than we can imagine. They discovered that at a certain depth, the temperature of the soil remains stable throughout the year, regardless of whether a blizzard is raging above. They used this feature to create what we would today call a geothermal buffer. Deep underground galleries and basements served not only as storage rooms for provisions and wine, they functioned as a giant stable temperature accumulator that prevented the foundation and lower floors from freezing. The air in these rooms never dropped below a certain level, creating a safety cushion for the living quarters above. It was a passive heating system that required no wood, coal, or maintenance. The builders specifically designed ventilation shafts that connected these underground levels to the upper halls. The air, which was warm by winter street standards, rose upward, mixing with cold currents and moderating the climate in the castle. It did not feel hot, but it saved people from the piercing cold that could kill a person in their sleep. The system worked constantly, day and night, using the free energy of the planet itself. Interestingly, it was in such underground rooms that kitchens and bakeries were often located. Huge ovens, operating around the clock, heated not only food, but also the massive stone vaults of the underground. The stone absorbed this heat and slowly, very slowly, released it into the surrounding space and up to the living quarters. The result was a warm floor effect, only on the scale of the entire building. The ground beneath the castle acted as a natural thermos, storing the heat accumulated during the summer and releasing it in the winter. Engineers calculated the thickness of the basement walls to insulate them as much as possible from external freezing. In some castles, complex systems of double floors have been found in the basements, the purpose of which remained a mystery for a long time. Now we understand that these were air gaps for thermal insulation. This approach required enormous earthworks even at the stage of construction of the fortress. The soil was excavated by hand, often in rock formations, which took years and cost a lot of money. But the customers were willing to incur these expenses, understanding that it was an investment in their survival. Without a strong, warm foundation, the stone castle would have turned into a crypt that was unfit for living. There is evidence that during particularly cold winters, people would descend to live on these lower levels. There, surrounded by barrels and supplies, it was more comfortable than in the windswept ceremonial halls of the towers. It was a necessary but effective solution dictated by harsh reality. The architecture of survival dictated its own rules, where comfort came second to preserving life. We often underestimate the ancients' knowledge of the properties of materials and natural phenomena. They did not have thermometers, but they had a keen sense of temperature gradients and knew how to use them. Their solutions were intuitive, based on generations of observation and experience. And that experience told them that the Earth was the most reliable source of heat. Today, we spend enormous resources on heating, forgetting what is right under our feet. Medieval craftsmen did not fight nature, but used its inertia for their own purposes. They turned the disadvantage of confined space underground into its main advantage. Do you think modern architects could use natural resources as effectively without electricity and gas? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new facts.
These walls were built for a reason. No siege engine can...
Are you ready to learn the truth about why such thick walls were actually built? Of course, The first and most obvious reason was to defend against enemy siege weapons and battering rams. But walls 2 or 3 meters thick had another hidden function that was critical in peacetime. This gigantic mass of stone acted as a huge heat accumulator of incredible capacity. The principle of operation was based on the high thermal inertia of natural stone and mortar. During the day, when the fireplaces were burning, the sun was shining, or there were many people in the rooms, the walls slowly absorbed heat. They did not heat up instantly, like modern thin panels, but they cooled down incredibly slowly. This property allowed them to smooth out the sharp daily temperature fluctuations characteristic of the European climate. At night, when the fires in the fireplaces died down and the temperature outside dropped sharply, the walls began to return the accumulated heat back into the room. The process of heat transfer could last for hours, maintaining an acceptable temperature until morning. It was similar to the work of a modern Russian stove, only the house itself played the role of the stove. The inhabitants of the castle were inside a heated stone bag. Special attention was paid to the interior decoration of the walls, which helped regulate this process. Often, the stone inside the rooms was covered with wood, creating an additional layer. The wood heated up faster and gave an instant feeling of warmth while the stone warmed up deep inside. This combination of materials was the result of a long search for the perfect balance. Engineers also took into account the orientation of the walls to the cardinal points when designing living rooms. The south walls were made particularly massive so that they could accumulate maximum solar energy during the day. The north walls, on the contrary, were often made double or protected by utility outbuildings. It was primitive, but effective energy efficiency. Interestingly, in the oldest castles, living quarters were often built directly into the thickness of the outer fortress wall. This seemed dangerous from a military point of view, but it was justified climatically. The enormous mass of the outer wall served as a buffer protecting the small room inside. People lived inside the defensive structure as if in a shell. Of course, heating such a massive stone from scratch was a virtually impossible task. If the castle stood empty and froze, it took weeks of continuous stoking of the fireplaces to warm it up. That is why the servants began to heat the rooms long before the arrival of the owners. Thermal inertia worked both ways. Cold walls resisted heat for just as long. There was also the problem of condensation when warm air touched stone that had not yet warmed up. The walls began to cry, creating dampness, which was the main enemy of health in the Middle Ages. Combating this dampness required constantly maintaining a fire, even if no one was in the room. The castle was a living organism that required a constant supply of energy. Understanding the properties of stone made it possible to build structures suitable for living in the harshest regions of Scotland or Scandinavia. Without the use of thermal inertia, survival there would have been highly questionable. Stone masons were true guardians of heat. Isn't it amazing how rough stone masonry performed the function of complex climate control equipment? Do you think such a passive heating system is relevant in our age of energy conservation? In the next chapter, you will learn why fireplaces were not actually that effective a means of heating. Want to know a secret that will change your life and end your idea of home comfort? We tend to romanticize open fireplaces, considering them a symbol of warmth and comfort in an old house. But the truth is that the first medieval fireplaces were monstrously inefficient from an engineering point of view. Most of the heat simply escaped up the chimney along with the smoke, leaving people shivering a meter away from the fire. Medieval engineers revolutionized fireplaces when they began to change the design of the hearth and chimney. Initially, the fire was simply lit in the center of the room, and the smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, which was extremely wasteful. Moving the hearth to the wall and creating a chimney built into the masonry was a technological breakthrough. This made it possible to heat the structure of the building itself, rather than just the air escaping into the sky. But the main secret was a complex system of smoke channels running through the castle walls. The chimney did not always go strictly vertically upwards, as we are used to seeing in modern houses. It was often curved or stepped, so that the hot smoke would remain inside the wall longer. Every extra meter of smoke passing through the stone meant additional heat transferred to the building. Engineers began experimenting with the shape of the firebox, trying to reflect as much heat as possible into the room. The back wall of the fireplace began to be made sloped, and the side walls were turned at an angle. This turned the fireplace into a reflector that directed infrared radiation toward the people sitting in front of it. The physics of combustion was studied through trial and error over centuries. Another important invention was the massive stone caps above the hearth. They not only collected smoke, but also heated up themselves, becoming a huge radiator at the top of the room. The heat from such a cap spread more gently and evenly than the harsh heat of an open flame. This made it possible to heat large volumes of air in high-ceiling rooms. Some castles had a system where one powerful fireplace heated several adjacent rooms at once. The chimney passed through the wall of the neighboring bedroom or study, heating it without an open fire. This was the prototype of central heating and reduced the risk of fires and smoke inhalation. Sleeping by a warm wall was a privilege of the lords. The use of cast iron plates at the back of the fireplace, which appeared later, further increased efficiency. Metal heated up faster than stone and radiated heat more actively into the room. It was a combination of metallurgy and architecture for one purpose: to defeat the cold. Thus, the fireplace went from a fire on the floor to a complex engineering device. It was a constant struggle for efficiency, for every calorie of heat obtained from burning precious wood. We rarely think about this when we look at beautiful portals in museums. Please like this video if you also love sitting by the fire, but now understand how much science is behind it.
Section here, the crimson is loose. It must be tightened before it frays.
Guess how long it took to create this unique insulation solution? We are not talking about building materials, but about what was hung over them, the famous tapestries. We are used to perceiving them exclusively as works of art and a demonstration of the owner's wealth. But originally, their main function was to insulate the icy stone walls. Heavy woolen carpets were hung a short distance from the wall, leaving an air gap of several centimeters. This still air acted as an excellent insulator, preventing the heat from the room from escaping into the cold stone. The tapestry created a room within a room effect, cutting off the living space from the hostile outer shell. The fabric for such products was incredibly dense and heavy, often multi-layered. It took years of work by an entire team of weavers to create one large tapestry, which made it insanely expensive. But this price was offset by the fact that the temperature in a room covered with fabrics was several degrees higher. It was literally textile armor against the cold. Curtains on windows and doorways also served as engineering barriers rather than decoration. Windows, even when closed with wooden shutters or mica, remained the main sources of heat loss. Multi-layered velvet curtains, lined with fur or wadding, created an airtight seal. They blocked the drafts that whistled through the castle. Canopy beds are another example of creating a microclimate with textiles. A thick canopy completely covered the sleeper, keeping the heat of their own body and breath inside a small space. In a huge, icy bedroom, the bed turned into a small, warm tent. Without this, sleeping in winter would have been simply dangerous to one's health. The floors were also covered with thick carpets, often in several layers, to cut off the cold from the stone slabs or the ground. Walking on stone, even in shoes, would have been a challenge, so textiles were everywhere. The East supplied Europe with carpets, and this was a strategic import. Tapestries were a mobile heating system that could be transported from castle to castle. When the court moved, the walls were exposed and instantly cooled, becoming dead. And in the new location, textiles quickly created coziness and thermal comfort again. It was a modular life support system. Even clothing was part of this concept. People wore layered garments indoors. Housecoats were lined with fur, and nightcaps were worn on the head. The person himself became an isolated object in a cold environment. All this textile architecture required constant care, cleaning, and protection from moths. But without it, the stone boxes of castles would have been uninhabitable in winter. Soft fabric defeated hard stone in the battle for warmth. Would you use carpets on the walls in a modern renovation for warmth? Share your opinion in the comments. Next, you will learn why castles became half their size in winter. In winter, life in a medieval castle changed dramatically, and this applied to the very geography of living. Castle owners used the tactic of compressing space deliberately conserving the vast areas of their estates. With the onset of the first serious cold weather, the inhabitants of these strongholds began a mass migration deeper into the stone walls. It resembled seasonal migration, only it took place within a single building. Heating the gigantic staterooms and long galleries was economically impossible and completely pointless. The stone froze through, and even huge fireplaces could not warm the air in rooms with high ceilings. Attempts to heat such halls would have led to the instant disappearance of all the wood supplies. Therefore, life was concentrated in several small and adjoining rooms. A kind of winter apartment was created inside the large castle complex. Usually, rooms facing strictly south were chosen in order to catch every ray of the rare winter sun. These rooms had to have the best and deepest fireplaces, which provided good draft. The owners carefully checked that there were no drafts in the selected rooms. All other doors leading to the empty wings of the castle were tightly closed for the entire winter. The gaps under the doors and in the window frames were tightly plugged with old rags, wool, or even clay. The passageways were hung with heavy woolen fabrics and tapestries, which acted as heat insulators. The castle seemed to fall into a deep hibernation, shutting down unnecessary organs to conserve energy. In these winter quarters, the concentration of people was significantly higher than in the summer. The lord's family, who could live in different wings in the summer, now spent most of their time together. Everyone crowded into 1 or 2 rooms where the fire was constantly maintained. This allowed for more efficient use of the heat from the fireplaces and even the heat from people's breath. Privacy and personal space took a back seat to the harsh necessity of not freezing. The lord, his wife, and children could sleep, eat, and spend their leisure time in one room for weeks on end. Even personal quarrels had to be put on hold, as there was simply nowhere to go. Warmth became the most important value that united the family. The ceilings in such winter rooms were often made lower on purpose during construction. If the ceilings were high, special false ceilings made of thick fabric stretched over frames were used. Canopies over beds were also widely used, creating a closed capsule for sleeping. The less air there is to heat, the easier it is to maintain a comfortable temperature. The high vaulted ceilings of the front halls were the main enemies of warmth in the winter cold. All the hot air instantly rose to the top, leaving people below shivering from the cold. Fabric awnings helped to keep the precious heat right where the people were. This created a cozy, albeit cramped atmosphere. Often, rooms located directly above the kitchen or bakery were chosen for wintering. In these utility areas, the stoves worked around the clock, preparing food for a huge crowd of people. The stone floors heated up and began to give off heat to the rooms above. The heat from the constantly working stoves rose through the floor, providing additional and very high-quality heating. This was the most privileged and desirable location in the castle during the winter. Getting a room above the bakery was considered very lucky because the floor there was always warm to the touch. Medieval architects understood the physics of heat perfectly and took this zoning into account at the design stage of the citadel. Thus, the wisdom of the builders helped their descendants survive. Even servants moved from their cold rooms and attics closer to the center of warmth. They were often allowed to sleep in the corridors directly adjacent to their masters' bedrooms. Sometimes trusted servants slept right on the floor in the same room where their master slept, at the foot of the bed. Their bodies created an additional source of heat in the room. The social boundaries that were unshakable in summer were somewhat blurred in winter in the face of a common enemy in the form of cold. Of course, the hierarchy remained, but the physical distance between the masters and the servants was reduced to a minimum. Survival required collective effort and mutual tolerance. The cold made all the inhabitants of the castle equal. Furniture was also moved closer to sources of heat, creating dense islands of life around the fireplace. Tables, chairs, and armchairs were placed so that the warmth of the fire touched those sitting. Far corners of the room could remain icy and dark, and people tried not to go there unless necessary. All activities, from dining to embroidery and games, took place strictly within the radius of the fire. The space was used extremely unevenly, but it was the only correct solution. People literally huddled around the fire, turning their backs or faces toward it. The backs of high armchairs and benches served as screens, reflecting heat and protecting from drafts from behind. Life was bustling in a space of a few square meters. Such seasonal migration within one's own home was the absolute norm for the medieval nobility. In summer, the castle was thrown wide open. All the doors were opened, and the air flowed through the galleries. In winter, the huge fortress was reduced to a small warm ball. This saved a huge amount of firewood and coal, which was difficult to deliver in winter. Psychologically, this brought the inhabitants closer together. But it also created serious tension due to the constant crowding. People grew tired of each other, as it was practically impossible to find privacy. Months spent in a confined space with the same people were a real test for the nervous system, but the only alternative was a cold death in empty, icy halls.
Spread it thicker by the hearth. You there, move faster.
Are you ready for the shocking truth about what served as a source of warmth under the feet of kings? We often imagine castle floors covered with luxurious oriental carpets with intricate patterns. But the reality of medieval life was much more prosaic, dirty, and smelly. The main floor covering, especially in common rooms, was a thick layer of ordinary straw, reeds, or river rushes. And this was done not only and not so much for softness when walking. The main task of such flooring was to generate and retain precious heat. Stone floor slabs became icy in winter and literally sucked the life out of people. Walking on them without protection was dangerous to health. This organic flooring worked as a natural and very effective insulator. It reliably separated the feet of the castle's inhabitants from the icy stone slabs of the foundation. The layer of straw could reach a considerable thickness, sometimes reaching the ankle. This created an air cushion that prevented the cold from penetrating from below. To combat the effects of this heating, fragrant herbs were often added to this layer. Servants scattered lavender, mint, wormwood, meadowsweet, or fragrant jasmine. They were supposed to mask the specific smell of decay that inevitably filled the hall. In addition, the herbs repelled insects, fleas, and lice, which happily bred in the warm straw. The result was a complex living ecosystem right under the feet of the feasting aristocrats and their guests. In winter, they tried not to change this layer completely so as not to disturb the temperature balance. The servants only added fresh, clean straw on top, covering the dirty layer. It resembled a layered pie made of organic matter. Completely replacing the flooring would have led to the loss of all the heat accumulated over the weeks. It would also have stopped the fermentation process that had started in the lower layers. The dirty floor was a warm floor, and that was the main argument in its favor. Comfort was placed above sanitary standards. In addition, medieval castles actively used the living warmth of domestic animals. Stables, cowsheds, and pigsties were often located on the ground floor or in a high basement. The living quarters of the people were located directly above them, one floor higher. The heat from dozens of large animal bodies rose upward through the cracks in the wooden floors. Cows and horses give off a huge amount of heat just by living. The animals worked like big living heating batteries running around the clock. At night, when the fireplaces burned out, this heat was especially noticeable and important. The castle's architecture brought people and animals together in a single heating circuit. In simple rural houses, livestock was often kept in the same room where people lived. They were separated from the living area only by a light wooden partition or curtain. In castles, the distance was greater and propriety was observed, but the physical principle was the same. The breath and body heat of cows and horses contributed significantly to the overall heat balance of the building. Of course, this approach inevitably led to serious hygiene problems. The smells of manure and rotten straw were constant companions in the lives of even the highest nobility, but cold was considered a far more terrible and deadly enemy than stench or dirt. People adapted to the heavy smells by masking them with incense. However, the human body is unable to adapt to extreme cold. Therefore, biological heat was the most reliable, accessible, and completely free resource. How safe do you think this method of heating was from a sanitary point of view? In the next chapter, you will learn how steam helped to deceive the sensation of cold. Medieval engineers may not have known the complex word thermodynamics, but they understood human sensations and the psychology of comfort very well. They noticed that humid air is perceived by humans as warmer and more pleasant than dry air of the same temperature. This observation, based on centuries of experience, formed the basis for another way to combat the cold: the use of steam and increased humidity. In castle kitchens, where huge cauldrons of fatty soup and water boiled around the clock, It was always warmer, and not just because of the open fire. The air, saturated with thick steam, enveloped the body, creating the feeling of being in a steam room or sauna. The thermal conductivity of humid air is significantly higher, so it transferred heat from fire sources to people more efficiently and quickly. Cooks and kitchen workers often wore light clothing in winter, while the guards froze on the walls. Sometimes open vats of hot water were specially brought in and placed in the living quarters and bedrooms of the nobility. The actively evaporating moisture increased the overall humidity in the room, removing the unpleasant dryness inevitably caused by the constant burning of fireplaces. The fire burned oxygen and made the air prickly while the steam restored its softness. The dry air from the fireplaces severely dried out the mucous membranes of the nose and throat, making people vulnerable to colds and winter illnesses. Steam solved this medical problem by moisturizing the respiratory tract and making breathing easier. Herbs were often added to the water, providing a kind of inhalation therapy to prevent illness. The tradition of taking hot baths in huge wooden barrels right in the bedroom also had an important dual purpose. It was not only and not so much a hygienic procedure as a powerful way to warm up a frozen room. The cooling mass of water in a large barrel, reaching hundreds of liters, worked like a huge battery. It gave off heat to the space for a long time, even after the bath was over. In addition to external heating, great importance was attached to internal warmth. Hot drinks and fatty liquids were an essential and constant part of everyone's winter diet. Internal heating was as important for survival as an external source of fire. People had to be warm from the inside. Constant consumption of hot meat broths and mulled wines with lots of spices helped maintain body temperature. Spices such as pepper, cloves, and ginger were considered blood-warming agents. They made the heart beat faster, spreading heat to the extremities. Humidity also helped to retain heat in home textiles and clothing. Thick woolen fabrics, which absorb very little moisture, retained body heat better and were less susceptible to drafts. The wool fibers swelled, creating a denser barrier against the cold. It was a very delicate balance that had to be skillfully maintained. After all, excessive dampness inevitably led to mold on tapestries and rotting furniture. But moderate, controlled humidity really saved people from the piercing dry cold. People tried to gather in large, dense groups in small rooms. Their breath also actively humidified and heated the air in the enclosed space. In a cramped room full of people, the temperature rose very quickly and remained high for a long time. The human body itself evaporates moisture through breathing and through the skin, acting as a living humidifier and heater. The collective heat created a special microclimate that allowed people to survive the night without extra firewood. This method of deceiving the senses was simple, accessible, but extremely effective. By creating such a tropical microclimate in a single room, it was possible to survive the most severe and prolonged cold. The warmth was felt by the skin, not measured by precise instruments, which did not exist at the time. And if the humid air gave people comfort and the opportunity to sleep, then the engineering solution was absolutely correct. The subjective feeling of warmth was much more important than any objective indicators. In the struggle for warmth, not only the brute force of fire was used, but even optics and the physical properties of metals. Fire in a conventional fireplace radiates heat evenly in all directions. Unfortunately, most of it goes into the back stone wall of the hearth, uselessly heating the bricks. In fact, half of the firewood was wasted on heating the street or the thickness of the outer wall. To correct this injustice, engineers and blacksmiths began to use metal reflective screens. In everyday life, they became known as fireplace plates. It was a simple but ingenious invention that changed the efficiency of the home hearth. These heavy cast iron or iron plates were installed vertically on the back wall of the hearth, directly behind the fire. The metal quickly heated up to red hot and began to act as a powerful secondary radiator. It returned the heat back into the room, preventing it from escaping into the cold masonry. In addition, the polished or simply smooth surface of the metal reflected invisible infrared rays. This process was similar to how a normal mirror reflects sunlight. Heat waves bounced off the metal and were directed towards the people sitting in front of the fireplace. This invention increased the efficiency of the fireplace by 20 or 30%. The plates were often decorated with rich reliefs, the owner's coats of arms, and biblical scenes. The decor was done not only for beauty, but also for practicality. Portable metal braziers with hot coals were also used in large halls. They were placed in the center of the room, away from the fireplace, and their metal walls radiated heat in all directions. This made it possible to create islands of warmth where stationary heating was not possible. This was quite dangerous due to the release of carbon monoxide, which often caused headaches. But this risk allowed servants and guests to warm up in huge rooms. Braziers were a mobile solution to the problem of cold. Polished copper utensils hung on the kitchen walls or near the fire also contributed to the heat balance. The shiny surfaces of pots and dishes reflected heat rays, preventing them from being absorbed by the dark walls. A complex network of heat reflections was created. The room was filled with what is known as radiant heat coming from all sides. This type of heat penetrated thick clothing much better than simply heated air. The kitchen, hung with copper, was the coziest place in the house. Sometimes special metal balls or closed containers were used. They were heated in the fire and then hung on chains in the center of the room or placed in bed. They worked as point sources of intense radiation and were very hot. Metal served as an ideal conductor and distributor of scarce thermal energy. It allowed a piece of fire to be transferred to places where it was impossible to build a fire. For example, under a blanket at the feet. Even knightly armor and weapons hung on the walls as trophies could act as small heat accumulators. If they were close enough to the fire, the metal would heat up and then cool down slowly. Although, of course, their main role was military and decorative. But in the closed system of a medieval castle, every detail mattered. Each item was considered in terms of its ability to retain or reflect heat. The fight against the cold required the use of all available resources. Metalworkers worked closely with masons to create hybrid heating systems. Metal quickly absorbed heat from the fire and just as quickly gave it back to people. This compensated for the inertia of stone, which took hours to heat up. The laws of physics worked to create comfort, even if people did not understand the formulas. Thus, the medieval interior was not just a collection of beautiful things, but a working thermal scheme. Metal, stone, wood, and fabrics interacted with each other to create a livable environment. When architecture and large fires were not enough, personal heating devices came to the rescue. Medieval engineers and craftsmen developed a whole range of gadgets for individual use. The most popular was a bed warmer, a closed metal container with a long handle. Hot coals from the fireplace were poured into this pan with a lid and carried between the icy sheets before bedtime. This allowed people to lie down in a warm bed, which was critical for maintaining good health. Without this procedure, sleeping in a freezing bedroom could be fatal. There were also ceramic or stone bricks that were heated in the hearth, wrapped in cloth, and placed at the feet. Stone and ceramics retained heat for a long time, acting as a nighttime battery. It was a simple but reliable way to stay warm until morning. In churches and cathedrals, where there was no heating at all, parishioners used portable foot warmers. These were small boxes with coals inside and holes on top. By placing your feet on such a box and covering yourself with a long cloak, you could sit through a long service. Clothing also had its secrets. Fur-lined pockets or special muffs for the hands. A muff was not just a fashion accessory, but a necessary element of survival. Small bags of heated sand were often hidden inside it. There were even special heating stones for food. They were placed on the table or under dishes so that the fat would not solidify instantly in the cold hall. Cold food was considered unhealthy, and the struggle to keep it warm was part of the culture of feasting. Personal warmth was the last line of defense. If the walls and fireplaces were not enough, people created a thermal cocoon directly around their bodies. This required constant action, heating, replacing, rearranging. These items often became works of art, decorated with engravings and stones, but their utilitarian function always remained paramount. Warmth was the most precious gift. Many of these items, in modified form, have survived to this day. Rubber hot water bottles and electric blankets are direct descendants of those medieval inventions. The principle of local heating has remained unchanged. In addition to physical methods, there was a powerful factor of biological adaptation and long-standing habit. People in the Middle Ages perceived cold completely differently than we do today. An indoor temperature of around 10 or 12 degrees Celsius was considered quite normal and workable. It did not cause them to complain or want to leave the room immediately. Their bodies were hardened from early childhood and tuned to a completely different thermal regime. Infants were not wrapped in stuffy synthetic blankets, but were accustomed to coolness in a natural way. As a result, the metabolism of medieval people worked more actively, maintaining the necessary body temperature without external assistance. What seems like extreme cold to us today was simply pleasant freshness for them. They never expected that in winter it would be possible to walk around a stone house in a single light shirt. Wearing thick outer clothing, fur hats, and even gloves indoors was the absolute norm. The concept of home comfort at that time did not imply walking barefoot. Comfort was achieved not by raising the temperature of the surrounding air, but by carefully warming the person themselves. Psychologically, a live fire in the fireplace played a huge role. Even if it objectively provided little heat, the mere sight of bright flames created a powerful illusion of warmth on a subconscious level. Seeing the light and sparks, the brain believed that the situation was under complete control. Gathering around the hearth was an important ritual that united all the inhabitants of the castle against the oppressive darkness and cold outside. The general daily routine was also radically adjusted to the winter cold and short daylight hours. In winter, people tried to go to bed much earlier than in summer. Sleeping under heavy blankets was the best and most economical way to conserve energy and keep warm. All of people's main activities shifted to the lighter and slightly warmer hours of the day, when the sun warmed the walls at least a little. Food in the winter months became much fattier and more caloric. The body constantly demanded high-quality fuel for its internal biological furnace. Salted lard, fatty meat, and thick bean soups, which took a long time to digest, were used. All this helped the body generate its own heat from within throughout the day. Diet was as important a part of the heating system as firewood. Drinks also played a role in keeping warm, although they sometimes provided only a temporary sensation. Various types of mulled beer and wine with spices were popular throughout Europe during the winter months. They were consumed in moderation, more for survival and cheerfulness than for pleasure. The spices in these drinks helped to get the blood flowing more quickly to frozen limbs. Hardening was not a conscious choice, but a natural and integral part of everyday life. People who grew up in conditions of constant drafts and stone floors enjoyed enviable health. Their blood vessels became accustomed to reacting quickly to temperature changes, protecting their organs from hypothermia. Modern people in such conditions would most likely not last a week without the usual heating systems. Social cohesion and closeness to one another also helped people survive the harsh winters. People warmed each other in the most literal, physical, and figurative sense of the word. Mutual assistance and constant community made the fight against the cold a common task. Loneliness in winter was considered an unaffordable luxury that only a few could afford. Medieval man did not try to proudly conquer nature. He sought to harmoniously integrate himself into its rhythms. He understood perfectly well the inevitable cyclical nature of the seasons and accepted the cold as a given. They prepared for winter in advance, gathering supplies and insulating their homes without unnecessary complaints. It was a profound humility, reinforced by engineering ingenuity and a will to live. Thus, successful survival in winter was a complex and difficult task for everyone. It included architectural tricks, special clothing, a high-calorie diet, and the right psychological attitude. And the ancestors of modern Europeans coped with this task brilliantly. After all, they managed not only to survive, but to build a great civilization on this harsh and cold continent.
The thick clay holds the heat well, you see.
They did not have access to electricity or gas, but their ingenuity compensated for the lack of technology. Many of these solutions, zoning, heat accumulators, local heating, are returning to modern architecture under the banner of ecology. We often look down on our ancestors, but when it comes to energy efficiency and survival, they could teach us a thing or two. Their homes breathed with them and protected them, using the power of nature itself. Perhaps we should learn from them how to appreciate every degree of warmth. Which of these medieval tricks did you find most surprising or ingenious? Write in the comments which method you would dare to try today. And be sure to subscribe to the channel to learn even more forgotten secrets of history.